many, many years ago. So this would have been coming close to 25 years since I visited Thailand, and I absolutely love Bangkok. And taking buses on the river was a joy, and the food was delicious. So hopefully I get an excuse to come back to Bangkok sooner or later.
And then visit art.
Yes, absolutely. That's the plan. Just to make sure what you're seeing, are you seeing just my slide, or are you seeing an Excel file overlay? Or
Now
just
we see both of them.
Small Excel file
Both.
in the middle
oh,
of
you
the
see the
slide.
Excel file. Okay, there we go. So it's sharing the screen, not just a window. I wasn't sure about that. Okay, so now you know my game plan, because I have a lesson plan with timing. So I'll do this way. So first of all, again, thank you so much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. So as Atit mentioned, I teach entrepreneurship, and I'll give a bit of more in-depth introduction about what I do and who I am and where I come from in a second. And just for context, again, I'm teaching at the University of British Columbia in the Okanagan. This is the smaller campus of UBC. The bigger one is in Vancouver, and that's where the majority of our students and faculty live and play and study. The Okanagan, just for context, is about 400 kilometers away. So it takes a good 4 or 5 hour drive for us to go from one campus to the other. So as you can imagine, we don't do it every day. And we usually actually fly in instead, because it is just an hour, 1 hour flight. So it would still be cheap, not cheaper, but easier, faster to do that. I am an assistant professor of teaching, focus on professional development and technology entrepreneurship. And I've recently received a chair position referred to as the Marshall Botter Chair in experiential learning and engineering leadership, which is part of my work to then collaborate with my co-chair colleague in Vancouver. So I will, for the next 3 years, I look forward to engaging way more closely with my colleagues in Vancouver campus. So before I talk about the topic of today and about myself, it is growing more in recognition, and there is a very lively movement of reconciliation happening in Canada, in British Columbia. And part of it starts by respecting and recognizing the traditional ancestors, communities of the land on which we work, and which is colonized by Western settlers that came across the ocean from Europe to North America continent. And so the Okanagan Valley, and you see a picture of Okanagan Lake, and there is a floating bridge connecting the two sides. On the right side would be the city of Kelowna, where the UBC Okanagan campus is, and on the west side is West Kelowna, which is a separate city. And the Okanagan Valley surrounding the Okanagan Lake is the traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory of the Syilx people. The picture on the left is a picture of the road signs that we have on campus, and you will note that in addition to the English language, we have a duplicate of the signage in the Syilxan language, which is the traditional language of the Syilx people. It is an endangered language. There are a very small number of fluent speakers of Syilxan, and it gives me great pride to share that UBC Okanagan campus is a home for a relatively new bachelor's in Syilxan language. And so as of last year, we now offer this program degree in Tsiltchin language. So students from the community can come and revitalize the language. And part of that testament is with the signage that we have on campus and the practice of recognizing the land when we start classes, when we start meetings, when we start ceremonies and gathering. So about me, my background is interesting and diverse, and hopefully give you a flavor of my worldview and how I came to be who I am in front of you right now, at least professionally speaking. I am mostly an educated chemist. I did my bachelor's in chemistry, and realistically, all the courses I took were traditional pure chemistry courses, except for two of them that were in biology and genetics and endocrinology as electives. And I continued pursuing that chemistry route through my master's and eventually to my PhD. And when I started my PhD, that's when things started to get interesting. And I'm going to take note to the fact that we're talking about work integrated learning and experiential learning. And one of the things that I really value about having these discussions is really giving space to reflect on where people end up in most unexpected ways. And it's so feels so idiosyncratic sometimes that it's complete coincidence that you ended up working in a company with particular people that completely changed your course of career trajectory. And so for me, that came about in my PhD. When I started my PhD in what would be a more traditional research in chemistry, only to find out that I was not really motivated to pursue a PhD in chemistry for the pure science of it. I was looking for something more applied, and I ended up going from one supervisor to another. That transition was very stressful, emotional, feeling of failure and needing to restart, and landed me with another faculty supervisor who was a lot more practical, applied in her approach, and very entrepreneurial. And being with my second PhD supervisor is when I started engaging in two very meaningful career pathways. The first one is you see me with my spoon on my nose, doing outreach with a charity that was created by my former supervisor and a colleague from the lab. They're both Filipino and they both live in Canada, but they still keep very intimate relationship with people in the Philippines, and they go back every year multiple times. And they realized how slow the science education is advancing and catching up with technology, and wanted to do something about it. And so they started a charity that provides professional development training for science educators in high school, K-12, in rural communities in the Philippines. And I used to tell people when I used to explain to people what it means in an age where everything can be found on YouTube. The idea of the charity was take the YouTube content by foot to areas that have no internet, and really help people keep up with the times and access the same knowledge that anybody in developed area has access to at the tip of their fingers. And this particular charity came out of an entrepreneurship program that my supervisor was running and playing around with and testing. She herself was a serial entrepreneur and had a few startups under her belt as a faculty, and started training graduate students to do the same. And that is how Pueblo Science, the charity, was created through that entrepreneurship program. I participated in that program. I tried a few ideas. None of them went very far, especially as being a PhD student. It's always hard to challenge. I was, a parent for a few very young aged babies. I I was doing my PhD, I was volunteering with a charity, and I was trying to start my own materials chemistry-based startup. And so the startup idea was the hardest one, and that was the first to kind of fall out of favor in my need to prioritize my skill set and my attention. But by the time I graduated my PhD, that when the opportunity presented itself to then double down on my passion for education and my understanding in innovation and entrepreneurship to start teaching innovation and entrepreneurship. And that started a 6-year position teaching innovation and entrepreneurship at the University of Toronto, working under, again, still the same person, my PhD supervisor became my work supervisor and really mentored me throughout those years. Those 6 years were really, again, influential in many ways. I got to teach innovation in entrepreneurship at the university level. I took some time off to do down to a 50% position, and at the same time hold a 50% position as a high school teacher. So I got to teach high school kids at the same time. So I was doing every other day, one day high school, one day university, for 2 years. And then I went back and continued full time in university. And then 3 years ago, in the midst of COVID, the position that I currently hold at UBC Okanagan opened up, and I applied, and I moved from all the way from Toronto in Eastern time to Okanagan and Pacific time. So several thousands of kilometers going west. And so since I joined UBC Okanagan, I joined at a very crucial time where entrepreneurship was catching on, with the recognition of the attention and the need to double down and provide better training, not better, more training, more courses, more opportunities to support entrepreneurial intentions for our students. Some of the work was already in motion when I joined, and so since I joined, I brought my background in education, my background in science, my experience teaching innovation entrepreneurship at U of T into Okanagan. And one of the pedagogies that I carried through all these years has been entrepreneurial work integrated learning, or EWIL for short. And so EWIL, which is the topic of our session today, conceptually is really that place in between the world of entrepreneurship education, and there's so much literature on entrepreneurship education. For decades, people have been writing about entrepreneurship education, and I'm going to give you a bit of flavor in a few slides from now. And at the same time, work integrated learning pedagogy has been extensively discussed and written about. And again, as being a course in issues and trends in cooperative education and work integrated learning, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with a lot of the literature, the classic literature and the more up-to-date literature. Again, cooperative education is probably the strongest piece with the biggest number of people engaged and actively working. Again, I met Atit at the World Association for Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning, WACE, at the University of Waterloo just this past summer. Canada has CWIL Canada, which is the Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada Association, the national. I'm on the board of ACEWIL, which is the Association for Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning of BC. Each province, most of our provinces, not all of them, but most of our provinces and territories have some representation of cooperative educators that have over the years expanded their mandate to work integrated learning in a more general sense. So EWIL pedagogy specifically is that space between or overlap between work integrated learning pedagogy and entrepreneurship education. And I'll talk a few slides from now. I have a definition, but before we go to defining what EWIL pedagogy is, I want to go back and kind of step one step back and kind of make sure that, again, I assume that we're all on the same page on what is work integrated learning pedagogy. What I don't know is how much you know about entrepreneurship education or entrepreneurship in general. And before I ask you what you do know, um, as I was introduced, I work at the School of Engineering, and I was hired to teach entrepreneurship to engineers. And the first obvious question to ask is, entrepreneurship is traditionally taught within schools of businesses, and the fact that it's taught outside of a school of business um, is gaining more acceptance, but it's still seen as less than obvious. And when I tell people I teach entrepreneurship, most people respond by, "Oh, you work in the School of Business." And I say, "No, I'm in the School of Engineering." And it's really valuable to, again, from a work integrated learning context and professional skills context, it's important to recognize why entrepreneurship is so not just important, but intuitively compatible with how we teach engineers. So some context on Canadian landscape, and I'm not sure if Thailand has similar approach. In Canada, engineers is a regulated profession, and part of the regulatory framework is identifying 12 engineering graduate attributes. And the regulatory body is Engineers Canada, and it creates these attributes through which the accredited programs are regulated to demonstrate that students finishing their undergraduate degree can demonstrate accepted level or advanced level of competency across these 12 attributes. And so as I'm going to list them one by one, and as you see them evolve, everything feels like if we replace the word engineer with entrepreneur, would be equally compatible, except for potentially two of them. So the first one that's not intuitively compatible or not universally compatible between engineers and entrepreneurs is a knowledge base for engineering. So the thing that we call about engineering knowledge or engineering science is unique to engineering. And a lot of engineers become entrepreneurs. A good chunk of tech startup founders are engineers by education. There's over 30%. So 1 in 3 tech startup founders are engineers by education. And so that's unique for engineers, not necessary for all entrepreneurs. However, the second attribute, problem analysis, defining a problem and analyzing it, understanding it well to solve it. That's what entrepreneurs do, not just engineers. The idea of investigation, again, what does it mean to investigate? In the context of an entrepreneur, investigation is looking at patents, looking at competitors, looking at market valuation and growth potential, investigating different financial models and venture funding. And there's so many things that one has to investigate. Once you know enough and you go out, you start the design process. Again, engineering design is a centerpiece in the engineering education program. At the same time, we talk about designing a venture, a business model with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have to go through the same design process as engineers do. Instead of designing a technical solution, entrepreneurs design a business model or a business idea. Probably the second piece that's unique for engineering would be the engineering tools, specific engineering tools that, again, entrepreneurs who are engineers may or may not need them, depending on the specific nature. So that's the second unique one for engineers. But then we go back to the idea of individual and teamwork. Again, entrepreneurs do not succeed by working alone. They succeed by building a team and growing that team. And they start by working independently and building that idea and creating a team and then making that team work. The seventh graduate attribute being communication. Again, communication is needed across all the activities of an entrepreneur, starting from communicating the idea and the vision to get buy-in, to support your idea and grow it, to get people to jump on the idea and join your team, or supporters or champions or venture capital investors. uh, getting people to give you the time of day to test out solutions and prototypes. All these things entrepreneurs need, as much as engineers need that. Professionalism is a catch-all for many things, but in the same case that engineers are expected to demonstrate professionalism within the engineering context, entrepreneurs, again, treating people with respect, being timely, being trustworthy, managing relationship with others, showing up on time, delivering what you promise to deliver. All these things entrepreneurs need as a foundation to gain trust and buy-in from others. The number 9 impact of engineering on society and the environment. Again, it's not unique to engineers. The impact of your venture on society and the environment is something that is maybe not as mainstream as it is for all the entrepreneurs that I've met or startup ideas that I've heard of, but it's definitely getting more traction. And very much we have a stronger emphasis socially on startups that are socially responsible and environmentally friendly and conscientious. This kind of leads to behaving with ethically and equitably, treating people ethically and equitably. Again, is something that we expect people to treat others well. Again, it's maybe not the first thing you think of entrepreneurs, and some people think of business salespeople as shady and untrustworthy. But entrepreneurs are not salespeople. They're not trying to upsell or misrepresent. The most successful entrepreneurs are those that exhibit ethical behavior and treating people equitably and honesty. And so it's definitely getting more attention than ever on how do you present yourself in a way that actually gets the type of buy-in that you want from others. And probably the most obvious piece that would probably be more expected by default from entrepreneurs than from engineers is the economics and project management abilities. I think the dollar sign, the bottom line is probably, if you ask people choosing entrepreneur over engineer, the default will probably be an entrepreneur first and engineer second. So even though engineers are expected to demonstrate that ability within engineering projects, again, entrepreneurs are equally expected to have understanding of economics, unit economics, scale economics, market economics, to make the case that they have a good idea that's worth pursuing. And the last piece, lifelong learning. Specifically, I teach entrepreneurship using the lean startup methodology, which is all grounded in the ability of one to learn, to come up with an idea, go out, talk to people, listen, learn, and adapt, evolve. And I will talk about my pedagogy in entrepreneurship towards the end of today. So I hope at this point, if you look at these 12 attributes that are mandated from all the engineers, it's a easy sell to say 10 out of 12 is essentially describing entrepreneurs as well as they describe an engineer. And so it's really no-brainer that entrepreneurship should live both in schools of businesses as well as schools of engineering. Now, I've been using the word entrepreneurship for so long, and I still haven't asked you, what do you think entrepreneurship is, or what do you know entrepreneurship is? So I'm going to take a pause and take a sip of water and ask. And I don't know, actually, maybe we can do that at chat. I don't know if I can see chats here, though. How do I see chats? I don't know. Atit, can you see chats?
Yes, it is in the toolbar. Can you find
I see
people?
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
next on the left hand side of people. Can you see it? Chat?
Maybe because I'm sharing screen, I can't see the chat. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Now I can see it. Great. Okay. So in the chat, um, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look at the four images, and I'm specifically not gonna explain what I meant when I chose them. I'd like you to take the time to interpret these images to what you think they mean and tell me from your perspective, which of these four images most represent to you what entrepreneurship is about? So if you want to click, put in the chat 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then I'd like to again hear from you. How did you interpret the image? So we've got 2 votes for number 2. That's cheating. You can't choose 2. You have to choose one of the 4. You can't put both of them. Sorry, it's not cheating, but you're I know it's hard, right? Just choosing one. Okay, so if you had to choose between 2 and 3, it'll be a 2. Okay. Um, Anybody wants to share why? Like why do you think that particular picture, number 2, represents to you more than the rest? Guess you can just unmute and talk, I guess, at this point. I don't know if you want to do a raise hands. I guess we're such a small number of people.
Let's start from Paiso first. Ajahn Paiso, could you share your idea?
Oh, I'm just typing. So I choose number 3, the picture 3 for the entrepreneurship. So I think it's more relevant because entrepreneurship is so we are just trying to do something new, bring something new to the target audience, maybe better services or better products. So this way is not smooth, so we need to take risks and we have facing challenges and problem. So this is I think is look like so like patient number 3. So on the way to your destination, you will face challenges, you will face obstacle and difficulty, but with the effort uh, of like maybe with the effort of your set and with the effort by other people, with the resource, or you can be able to achieve this entrepreneurship journey to reach your entrepreneurship goals. This is my interpretation of number 3 picture.
And can you highlight, and I appreciate you sharing, can you highlight what are the features in the image that stood out? You mentioned risk, you mentioned obstacles. So what is it that you see in the picture that signals to you all these?
So the picture, so they did even they have these things, so they stay keep happy and they so when we see in the picture, so people in the boat so are just happy and they feel proud of what they did for this. So
Mhm.
so maybe when you look at the behind, so they came from the long ways. but so they just have the passionate to keep going, and they feel really satisfied of what they are doing.
Mm-hmm. It really gives you a sense of adrenaline, right? This picture is really in motion. How about anyone else who chose number 2?
For me, who choose number 2? I think the entrepreneur should focus on the solution to solve the people problem first, and then they can take the adventure and facing with the challenge. So that for me, I think first of all, entrepreneur should focus on the solution to help the people problems.
Mm-hmm. So if I kind of connect that to number 3, if number 3 is really focusing on the journey, you're saying entrepreneurship is about the outcome, the solution, less
Yes.
about the journey. So it's not that you can't have both, but from a priority, the focus is on the outcome. Yeah.
And
Okay.
how about MC Rat? Your idea first, please.
Thank you, Song Tham. Thank you, everyone. And would like to say sorry because I cannot turn on my camera. I don't know why this morning, but I also chose number 2 according to the picture and my idea. I think that entrepreneurships encapsulate the dynamic journey by identifying the opportunities amid uncertainty and risk, and I think innovative idea, and also it is a kind of like a resource and strategy to create and sustain um, value. And I think that uh, entrepreneurships also involve initiation. Like you see the picture, it is the picture of a computer key. So it involves initiation, and also like the organization, and also the management of venue. Um, yeah. Sometimes it is kind of like a small business, or sometimes it a kind of larger enterprise. Um, and this is what I understand from the picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. For me, I think the number 2, because of I think the entrepreneur has to have the high leadership, also make the excellent decision for the business, or the see the overall of the picture of the business, also deal with the problem or whatever they have, the owner have to choose to find a solution for the problem, and seeing or for the opportunity for the future. So I choose number 2 for the solution.
Okay. Thank you. So if this was a democratic vote, 2 would win, right? Although that's not my intention, because ultimately the intention is, I guess, to recognize that people experience entrepreneurship differently, and people pursue entrepreneurship for different reasons. And it's sometimes it's hard to capture everything. And especially teaching entrepreneurship is trying to appease everybody's perception is not always easy. So if I were to define entrepreneurship, and so many people have done that before, what would be a good definition? I don't know if you want to try to write one sentence definition. How would you define it? And I know I see a long description of number 3. So if you need to describe in one sentence, which probably would be 10 to 15 words max, how would you define? You can write that in the chat. And the classic approach in science is, can you explain it to a student in grade 4, a 10-year-old? So if you can explain it to a 10-year-old, what would you tell them in one sentence? And since you're all in front of the computers, please don't Google it. I literally came from class teaching another course, and I asked students a question, and I saw some of them starting to Google it. I say, no, can't look at it in Google. I don't know if you're writing really long sentences or you're trying to overthink it. I'm looking for intuitively, what would you say? This is a conversation. We're not asking you to put it in a dictionary. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, what do we have? A person who organizes everything for the business. Okay. So this is defining an entrepreneur, which is okay. It's close enough. Entrepreneurship is someone comes up with a cool idea and takes a chance on it. Okay. Okay. I have a teenage daughter, and what I think is cool is definitely not what she thinks is cool. So cool is subjective, I guess. But if you can find other people who agree with you, it's cool. That's a good start. And take a chance on it. This is risk, right? So there's a risk involved. Maybe one more. Okay, someone who seek for a new challenge and find new solution to give more values. Okay. So I'm going to share with you, I don't want to say a formal definition, but it is a very often cited definition. And I think it captures the elements that all three of you or four of you indicated. So this is a definition by Professor Howard Stevenson from the Harvard Business School. And I don't remember I think he's the one who started the Harvard Business Review, hbr.org, which is very famous in publication. So he coined it in a very concise way, the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled. And what he means by that is the fact that it is a pursuit means that it is an activity that is very focused and outcome oriented. So there's a purposeful, action oriented, seeking outcome type of engagement. The idea of opportunity is really important because it means that there is you've identified an unmet need, you've identified something that someone else hasn't done, and that defines that opportunity. So you can do something that somebody else didn't do, or the opportunity could be replicating something that someone did, but in a new context. And then the last piece, the beyond resource controlled, with probably the thing that most people kind of fall short on when thinking about entrepreneurship, which is what is the fundamental difference between an entrepreneur or entrepreneurship as compared with essentially running a business or essentially expanding your business. So if you have an existing business and now you are adding a new product line to your business, is that entrepreneurial? And so the idea of beyond resource controlled is really the idea that if you have all the resources in your grasp to execute, then that's not entrepreneurial. It is still business operation. That's great. But if you have a business and you can take a loan on account of your successful business and you use that loan to expand, that's not being entrepreneurial because you are leveraging resources you already have. If you are a rich person or you are born to a rich family and you have a pile of cash and you start a company because you have a pile of cash, you might be pursuing an opportunity, but you are using resources that you have. And so Professor Howard Stevenson really highlighted the fact that entrepreneurship means that you're trying to build something way bigger than what you're able to achieve in your current state. And that signals the need for you to get buy-in, to get support, to sell, quote unquote, sell yourself and your idea to others to bring in these resources, the team, the funding, the access, and etc. Now, in my teaching, focusing on technology entrepreneurship, I actually, in my teaching technology entrepreneurship, I focus on the lean startup methodology. And as part of the lean startup methodology, I actually expanded Professor Stevenson's definition with a few elements. And so the way I defined entrepreneurship is the pursuit of creating an organization to execute a recurring process to leverage an opportunity beyond resources you control. And so for me, it's really important to demonstrate that in your entrepreneurial activity, you are purposefully trying to create an organization, means that you are creating a system, a process, getting a group of people that collectively are going through something that is recurring and is pursuing that opportunity beyond existing means. So this idea of growth, growing in number of people, growing in assets, growing in funds. And so pursuing an opportunity without creating an organization around it would be the equivalent of being a contractor. And so if I'm a plumber, there is an opportunity for me to serve people as a plumber. I get paid to show up, I fix the plumbing, I leave. And so I only get paid for as long as I show up to do the plumbing work. As soon as I don't show up, I do not get paid. The idea of creating an organization with a recurring process, it signals the need that you are creating something that has capacity beyond your individual capacity. And so people sometimes refer to it as this idea of passive income, that you still generate income when you are in the office and when you're not, when you show up to your shift, when you're not, when you are sleeping at home at night, or you're in the factory or the workshop or the shop. So that's the idea of to me that matters more, or in addition to the other elements that Professor Stevenson coined in his definition. Now, I shared with you, or I shared with Atit, a paper to read in preparation for today. And that paper, by colleagues from Australia, used this definition for entrepreneurship: the ability to transform ideas and opportunities into action by mobilizing resources. And so if you look at these two definitions, what are the things that you note that are different? Or maybe how is that, again, similar or different to the previous definition by Howard Stevenson versus the way I conceptualize it to my students? What are your thoughts there? This was a chat message. Oh, that was the previous one. Okay.
For my idea, I think we are in the mobilizing technology era, so that we have to concern how to use all of the mobilizing resources to align with our process and the expected outcome for us. And it need to think about the transformation.
How do you feel this is different from the way I defined it in the top half? Like, or maybe it's not different. Maybe it's essentially saying the same thing.
For me, I think it's different. It's the two things. The first thing is the process. In the conditional process, it means the recurring process that nowadays we are facing with the transformation, so that we cannot do the same thing for the tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing for me is transformation consideration, and the second thing is our resources is not the traditional resource. Now it is the new advanced or new technology resource, especially mobilizing or mobile application. That is mean it seem like the key factor for our living today.
Mm-hmm.
So for my idea is two things. The first is not recurring process. We have to focus on the transformation. And the second thing is not the traditional resource. It's we have to consider the mobilizing resource in additionally.
Mm-hmm.
That's all for
Okay.
my idea. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So you means that the understanding or definition that we understand about entrepreneurship and this new concept, right? The difference between these two.
So my question is, the top half is the way I define entrepreneurship to my students. And the bottom half is the definition I took from the paper that Atit has shared with you before today, from colleagues in Australia in the context of their what's called EDGE program or EDGE project. And I'm not saying if who's right and who's wrong, and I'm not asking what's better and what's worse. I'm just asking if you feel that these two definitions are similar or different, and if they are different, in what way?
Okay. So the first one is mostly focused above recurring leverage opportunity. So the first one has I just want to say about the similarity. This is the leveraging an opportunity, right? And also the second one also talking about transforming idea and opportunity into action. And so the first one is more focused on the opportunity. So if there is the opportunity as being the entrepreneur, so we need to find the way of the better solution. So even we have the limited resource. So the second one is more focused on we need to think about the our idea and our opportunity into action. So by mobilizing the resource, they are just it seems similar, but somehow it's quite it seems different. So the second one I think is more focused on the action. So we have to rethink about the action. What can be better for us to make the better solution or the better project. So I think this is the difference between these two definitions of the entrepreneurship.
Okay, thank you. And any other thoughts to build on that?
For me, I think the two ideas are a little bit different. For the first one, it seems like the start of creating something like we say the pursuit of creating an organization to execute a recurring process to leverage an opportunity beyond resources control. So this is, I think, the process of creating something new, like creating some idea, creating what you are going to do. And for the second one, the ability to transform ideas and opportunity into action by mobilizing resources. So for the second one, I think that we have already have things like our plan. We know what we are going to do, but it is about the process that we are going to do what we have already planned. This is what I think according to the two definition of entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and so we would you like to move on, or anybody else want to share some thoughts? Are we good to go? Yes. No, are you sharing the money rut? Oh, I'm not sure if you're writing or trying to unmute or both.
I try to change the battery because it's almost.
Okay.
Because I'm here in the Chiang Mai airport.
Oh, you're in
So-
the airport. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. That's okay. Okay. Let me move on, and you can finish. If you're writing a comment, you can post it, and we'll get back to that. But I guess the thing that I want you to kind of appreciate is, again, and some of your definitions were referring to this idea of risk. And so the question comes when the second definition talks about mobilizing resources, but it's not indicating who owns the resources and whether these are resources you already possess or not, is kind of omitting that element of risk. Because like I said, mobilizing resources that you own does have risk, but that's not the same as mobilizing resources or acquiring resources you do not currently have access to. And so the risk element is very crucial and common in treating entrepreneurship in that way. Now, when it comes to how do we teach entrepreneurship, I really like the quote by Bill Olet from MIT, who said, entrepreneurship is not a spectator sport. You cannot teach or learn entrepreneurship by sitting on the side and watching others do it. That's not how you learn. You have to be more active. You have to learn experientially. And in that case, the common framing of teaching entrepreneurship has been traditionally thinking about how do we teach about entrepreneurship when entrepreneurship is seen as a body of knowledge and we need to understand it. How do we teach for entrepreneurship? So entrepreneurship is seen as a body of skills and students need to acquire these skills. And the third piece is how do we learn through entrepreneurship, which is essentially challenging students to participate. And experientially, we can see that there are ways to do all of three can be accomplished experientially, where you understand entrepreneurship through critical observation. And so you're not a bystander, you're an active observer and you reflect on it and you engage in the environment, even though you might not be participating. You can simulate learning. And in the same way that we have undergraduate labs for chemistry and biology and physics, we can have an undergraduate lab that simulates entrepreneurship and acquire skills in that way. What you can also learn through participation, and of course, authentic participation would accomplish the critical observation and the simulated learning or non-simulated learning in this case. So you can really capture all of them. Now, I started this talk by talking about EWIL and talking about EWIL being part of work integrated learning. And I want to give, my respect and acknowledge the works that EWIL is built on, which is all the other typologies that we use for work integrated learning. And like I mentioned, cooperative education is probably the most known and has the most robust body of knowledge as far as I know. Maybe just on par with clinical practicum that has been long used in clinical work like nursing and social work and other type of registered practitioners. CWIL Canada, as the National Association for Work Integrated Learning, kind of ended up where we are today is with 9 types of work integrated learning. So the typology includes 9 types, and entrepreneurship is seen as one of them. Historically, it was really interesting for me because I was essentially seeing this evolve in real time because I finished my PhD around 2014, and at roughly the same time is when different typologies were emerging. And if you look at these reports, the first one by Academica Group reported on a 2013 typology that looked at apprenticeship versus co-op versus applied research, and then evolving into the 2016 guide by HECO, the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, that then expanded more and added placements and work study. Then BHER, the Business Higher Education Roundtable, which is a consortium that collects both industry leaders and higher education institution leaderships, then published in 2016 the first indication of entrepreneurship recognized as a type of will, and they called it emerging. So they identified a apprenticeship as a well-established work integrated learning form pedagogy, cooperative education, internships, mandatory professional practices, mostly clinical practices, practicum for nurses and teachers, applied research and service learning. But then it added this idea of incubation and acceleration on campuses and boot camps and hackathons as emerging types. And it was by 2018 when it was quote unquote officially kind of referred to as entrepreneurship as being a category of work integrated learning. And so going on CWIL's definition, again, this is the formal definition that CWIL Canada is using. And entrepreneurship work integrated learning allows a student to leverage resources, space mentorship, and or funding to engage, in early stage development of a business startup and or advance external ideas that address real world needs for academic credit. I'm not going to go too far into my analysis of that definition. Every definition all theories are wrong, and some are useful. And so all definitions have strengths and weaknesses, and we can spend an hour just unpacking this definition. But what it does allow us to then ask is, what does it look like in reality? And so that's kind of where I'm kind of going back to part of my own previously published work on really distinguishing two types of modalities that capture the e-will definition that Seawell Canada created. And just for context, I published this chapter on the modalities slightly before the Seawell definition, I think, came out, or maybe it's around the same time. So the way I see entrepreneurship, work integrated learning, there are two different modalities that are like big high level categorization. The first one is a self-directed, which means the student assumes the role of an entrepreneur, and whether it's in real practice or simulated, that expectation is to student to assume a role of entrepreneurship is core, and that intuitively leads to the implication that the student is creating their own working environment, whether physical or virtual. This is, again, going back to the triad model again, and I kind of skipped over that because I'm assuming you're all familiar with the triad model of work integrated learning, where we have the student, the working environment, and the academic institution oversight. So between the academia, the industry, or the placement, and the student, the triad model that we expect to see in a work integrated learning. And so the student is, of course, the center of the learning experience as being an entrepreneur. But then instead of an external established working environment, the student is assumed to be responsible to create their working environment independently as the entrepreneur. And as far as supervision, this is where we see an academic supervisor or industry mentor essentially replacing the workplace supervisor. In these cases, again, the student is self-directed, meaning they call the shots, they come up with a business idea, they pursue it, they engage in all the activities. And so they either report to an academic supervisor, which, again, in all work integrated learning, we have an academic supervisor. In this case, they do double duty. They can act both as the academic oversight and in lieu of an industry supervisor or mentor, or there is a provision of industry mentors that people bring in from external and say, well, you mentor this student. The other modality, of course, if it's not self-directed, then it has to be a supervised model where the student is actually not calling the shots, they're supervised. And so this would be a more classic traditional work integrated learning. The student is now a trainee, so they don't assume or pretend to assume to be an entrepreneur. And they still work, they still learn about, for, or through entrepreneurship by working within an existing startup. So in this case, the work environment has to be very well purposefully chosen to be a startup. Otherwise, this would not be entrepreneurship. I'll put an asterisk here and say that there is a term used called intrapreneurship, which is people exhibiting entrepreneurial activities within a large corporation. But that's kind of a bit beyond the scope of what I was planning for today, but recognizing that term exists. And of course, the entrepreneur is now the workplace supervisor. So the supervisor's identity as an entrepreneur is important. And I wrote a paper, it was a paper, I think it was a book chapter, that really looks at the challenges and unique challenges of creating that situation. What does it mean when you have a supervisor who's an entrepreneur, especially first-time entrepreneur with limited experiences in supervision? There's a lot of different implications when we choose an entrepreneur that is just starting off. And the same idea as the startup being unstructured, chaotic, nimble, and adaptive as startups in early stages are expected to be, that creates a lot of sense of uncertainty and lack of stability for students, and that indicates a lot of issues for students that need to be addressed. At the same time, serve in a really amazing learning experience for the students, because that's what entrepreneurship looks like in reality. So how do I teach entrepreneurship? And so I'm going to give you 3 courses that I teach. I'll briefly explain what they are. And I will not say upfront that all of them demonstrate work integrated learning. So your challenge is to pay attention to the pedagogy I'm explaining in all 3 courses and to judge for yourself. Do they meet the bar for what should count as work integrated learning, either as self-directed or supervised? So the first one is ENGR 411, Technology Entrepreneurship for Engineers. The second is ENGR 499, Entrepreneurial Capstone Engineering Design Projects. In both cases, it's a 400 level course, meaning it's at the senior highest level or the last year of students' undergraduate program. And the third one is AppSci 503, Startup Engineering Practicum, and the 500 code indicates it's a graduate level course. So this was designed for master's level students. So as I explained to you, the 3 of them, take note whether each one of them is an eWill example and whether you feel it demonstrates either self-directed or supervised modality of eWill. So the first one, ENGR 411, Technology Entrepreneurship and Engineers. This runs as a 12 weeks course in our winter term, so January through April. Students work in teams and they are expected to develop an idea, to design an idea for a new venture. They do that by applying lean methodology, a lean startup methodology, and we use the lean canvas as a documentation tool. And they are asked to iterate a design cycle of their startup idea. So they design a first draft, and then they iterate and learn, interview, learn, and iterate multiple times. And ultimately, at the end, there's a summative process-based presentation. So just to give you an idea, weeks 1 through 4, students learn about lean methodology, lean startup. They form teams, they ideate, and they produce their first version of their business or new venture idea captured by the lean canvas. And then in 2-week bunches, week 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10, they iterate. So they have a first draft, and then they go out and find potential customers or users. They look for feedback. They go back to the drawing board, they iterate, and then they create version 2, and then they submit that, and then 2 weeks spend, again, more interviews, more iteration, create the third version, and then in week 9, 10, they interview, get feedback, and iterate, and submit the 4th version by the 10th week. And I typically challenge them to have each team member should interview 2 strangers per week, spanning these 6 weeks. So they collectively can accumulate by the end of the course at least 50 or 60 interviews with potential customers or users, so they can actually learn by being responsive to what they hear. And then in week 11, 12, we kind of wrap it up with team-based process presentation where they get graded, and ungraded guests come in for the last class, and we do a pitch day, more celebratory in nature. So that's the first one. The second one is ENGR 499, Entrepreneurial Capstone. Capstone is a 24-week course spanning 2 winter terms from September through April. Students work in teams and they develop a new engineering design to solve real-world problem. In most capstone courses, capstone projects, the problem is provided by industry partners. The subset of entrepreneurial projects are brought by the students themselves. So they bring the idea by themselves, for themselves. Applying engineering design principles and processes throughout, and they are mentored by partners from E@UBCO our campus incubator program. So they get matched, whereas a regular capstone project has an industry mentor who has provided that problem. Because the student in entrepreneurial capstone provide the problem, we match them with a mentor from the campus incubator program. And they also provide, they are provided with online external training on social entrepreneurship, and specifically social entrepreneurship, because I'm pretty passionate about doing that social piece than the pure capitalistic one. The structure is weeks 1 through 12. They spend time in problem definition, scoping, constraining, doing research on literature, existing solution, finding users to look about user experience, design thinking to conceptualize it. And then the second half, weeks 13 to 24, they then prototype, they test it, they iterate, they improve, and finally they conclude in a large, oops, why is it not going forward? Oh, there we go. The course concludes with a showcase and competition, and I'm super happy to say that this year, the winning team in our capstone competition was an entrepreneurial team, surpassing all the industry-sponsored projects. So they really went above and beyond. The last course, AppSci 503, Startup Engineering Practicum, is a 12-week course in the summer. And so it's double intensity, which means 12 weeks course in summer equals 24 weeks in the winter term. So they spend twice as much of time per week in the summer than they do in the winter term. The students work as engineers, trainees within an early stage startup company, and they are supervised by the founder entrepreneur of the company. They learn about entrepreneurship through participation in startup working environment, and they learn and reflect about the role of engineers within the startup companies throughout consecutive classroom activities. So just by quickly show of hands, and I hope that you're paying attention to specifics and that you were able to kind of capture that. I'm gonna just make sure I can see everybody. Between the three courses, the first one, ENGR 411, Technology Entrepreneurship for Engineers, raise your hand if you feel this is an example of a self-directed entrepreneurial work and learning, self-directed EWEL. I don't see any hands, so raise your hand if you feel this is an example of a supervised modality of EWEL. Okay, nobody. Okay, what about engineering capstone? Entrepreneurial capstone, do you feel this is an example of a self-directed EWEL? Raise your hand if you feel that's an example of EWEL as a self-directed. Okay, I see one hand going up, two going up. Oh, it goes down immediately, or do you have to take it down? No? Okay, so we got two votes. Okay. And and raise your hand if you feel ENGR 499 is an example of supervised modality of EWEL. Okay, so one vote there, two votes. Okay. So two people feel the entrepreneurial capstone is an example of self-directed, and two people feel it's an example of supervised. And the third one, AppSci 503, wait, I don't know what you're voting for at this point. Is AppSci 503, Startup Engineering Practicum, is an example of self-directed EWEL. Raise your hand if you think it's a self-directed EWEL. Okay, so raise your hand if you feel it's an example of a supervised modality of EWEL. Okay, I see two. Okay. Was that three? Three votes? Okay. So just for clarification, I guess my intention here is that I do not feel technology entrepreneurship, ENGR 411, is a form of EWEL. While students are developing their idea, there is no interaction with a mentor from a startup. There's no incubation. It's really them going out and doing interaction with potential customers and coming back. So it's close, but not close enough. It's missing the linkage to what would be comparable to an industry supervisory expert. The capstone is what I would call an example of a self-directed. Students bring in their idea. They are mentored by an entrepreneur or somebody from the campus incubation program. So they do get that mentorship piece. They do engage in entrepreneurial pursuit, even though it's within a capstone and they're not expected to come up with a business case. They have the same intentionality of developing a solution that has a use case for themselves, essentially, as a potential customer. And historically, a common feature of successful entrepreneurs is for them to start solving their own problem first. And so a student coming up with a problem saying, I want to solve this problem for myself, is a good indicator for entrepreneurial intentions. Whether they go through the motion of a business plan, market research, that will come if they can solve the problem for themselves. And the third piece, the UpSci 503, I guess the name kind of says it all. It is a practicum. It is definitely a supervised modality of EWIL. It was designed as such from the beginning. Historically, the startup engineering practicum, I taught a similar version for 6 years at the University of Toronto. It was not exclusive for engineering. It was a practicum, but across all the undergraduate programs. And that was 6 years of learning how to tweak that pedagogy before I came to UBC and repackaged it in engineering specific context. And again, some of it is not important and some of it is important. The entrepreneurial capstone was a evolution of a traditional capstone. Like I said, most capstone projects are provided by industry partners. And so this was an expansion of an existing course. And of course, technology entrepreneurship was not designed from an EWIL perspective. And so far, it's not going to be one, at least for now anyway. Okay, so where we are on time, I think we're kind of close on time. And maybe the last piece that I was going to ask you is, again, kind of thinking about the chapter I asked you to read or shared with you, hoping you read it before. The EDGE program that informed the paper on developing enterprise capabilities, that had 4 illustrations of EWIL practice. And so I was hoping that we can kind of spend some time thinking about the 4 examples in the paper and the 3 examples I shared with you right now. How compatible they are with respect to, again, this idea of entrepreneurship, as teaching entrepreneurship as a purpose, and the way they engage in work integrated learning pedagogy, applying it to entrepreneurship, so an EWIL pedagogy. And because we're relatively short on time, I'm going to speed through. I was hoping to do it as 2 different kind of potential discussions, but for clarity, I'll kind of use one way that you can then, again, not just in this case, the 3 examples that I have versus the 4 examples that the paper had, a framework to compare. It always helps when you have framework, right? So one framework I really like is the authenticity proximity framework. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and if you've encountered that. I'm happy to share that reference. You can see it at the bottom of the page. It's by Cater and Co. And it's relatively recent, 2017, and it really talks about two dimensions: how authentic it is, and again, whether the learning activities and the assessments are authentic in the way that the students will encounter upon graduation as a professional experience. And the proximity asks whether the learning experience is taking place in the actual workplace and context, or is it a simulated environment or completely disconnected, mostly classrooms. So if you look at that framework, again, this would be my last question for you. for today. So my 3 examples are the 3 courses: Tech Entrepreneurship for Engineers, Entrepreneurial Capstone, and Startup Engineering Practicum. And the 4 examples from the paper talk about the Business Capstone unit, the Innovative Solutions, the Creative Enterprise and Entrepreneurship Program, and Transdisciplinary Enterprise Capability. So we could spend a few minutes kind of looking at this, and maybe for sake of time, if anybody has questions, maybe I'll stop here. But you can definitely use this framework and ask yourself, on the low, medium, high scale, just rough comparative, where would you put each of the 7 courses or experiences? And that gives you a sense of the dimensions that they demonstrate along the authenticity and proximity. So I'll stop it here, and I'm happy to share this again, the slide deck with you through Atit. I'm always excited to stay connected and continue conversations offline, well, online, asynchronously through LinkedIn. So if you're ever interested in reaching out, please do so. This is the QR code that will take you to my LinkedIn profile, or you can just look me up, Alon Eisenstein, on LinkedIn. And I guess I can stop here and see if you have any questions that you want to ask, or comments. And I don't know if you want me to leave the framework or the LinkedIn. Any preference? Which one you want to see a bit longer
Can
here?
you go to LinkedIn page again?
The LinkedIn? Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yes. I want to scan the QR.
Yeah, okay. Where is everybody now? Oh, I lost. There we go. Okay. Speaking of LinkedIn, would you be okay if I do a screen capture of all your lovely faces on the Teams? Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll count to 3, and then I'll take a screenshot. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. Did I get it? Yes. There we go. Excellent. Oh no, I think Atit, you moved. You look blurry because you moved. Okay, don't move. 1, 2, 3. Oh, excellent. Okay. I might take a few ones just in case, but anyway. What questions do you have?
So you mentioned about the self-directed and supervised morality projects, right? So there
Yes.
is the ongoing project about the more integrated learning practice to develop entrepreneurship skill among students, right? So when you implement these projects, are there any challenges that you face for implement this project to be successful?
Implementing the supervised?
Yes, implementing these projects. So from the student point of view, what are the challenges a student face to be able to be successful in this project?
So the supervised EWL has some interesting challenges, and they're not unique just for entrepreneurship. I've talked to colleagues that had similar challenges. I would say some of the challenges may present themselves anecdotally in other programs, but they're very much inherent and baked into an EWIL supervised model, which is, the first one is the fact that in an early stage startup, the organization lacks structure. There is no organizational structure. And when students work in a startup that is so disorganized, it really can go in bad ways. Some examples: you have 2 co-founders, and much like when dad says one thing and mom says one thing, and the kid is stuck, and I don't know if I should listen to mom or dad because they're saying different things. I had students who had one co-founder tell them to do A and the other co-founder telling them to do B, and they don't know who they need to listen to. And the fact that there's no clear hierarchy on who is accountable to whom, it can create some challenges. Now, this can be overcome by setting expectations to entrepreneurs, saying if you take a student intern, somebody has to own that responsibility, and you can't assume that they will figure it out. So helping them create processes and really helping entrepreneurs develop good organizational processes internally, not just for the entrepreneurship program, but beyond, for themselves in the long run. The other thing that is seen occasionally, depending on the context, is because the purpose of the course is teaching entrepreneurship and not teaching engineering. The context for engineering and EWIL, supervised EWIL, is that they function as engineers in a startup. And what could happen, and has happened occasionally, is the entrepreneur supervising the student is not an engineer. And the reason why they wanted an engineer as an intern or as a trainee is to complement the missing engineering skills they had in the startup. And so the engineer, being a trainee, can get stuck with making engineering decisions because there is no supervising engineer with industry knowledge that can help them. And so the student essentially has to source out finding an engineering mentor outside of the startup to help them make good decisions. And that's a unique challenge because of that, right? Because a traditional supervised internship or practicum is the trainee is supervised by a professional from the same discipline who knows, who passes along the tacit knowledge and the professional knowledge by the supervision. In a startup, that usually doesn't happen. And then the third piece that I've seen beyond that is, and going back to the chaotic nature of a startup, is the fact that a startup is a living experiment. And when you have a living experiment, the entrepreneur, the founder, comes up with an idea, says, why don't we try this? And they send the engineer to do some work and to design something or do some research. And then the engineer will spend a week or two on something and they bring back the solution. At which point the entrepreneur will say, well, we actually realized that it's not going to work. So we're going to drop it and we're going to try something else. And some entrepreneurs are very discouraged by that because they feel like I've spent 2 weeks doing this and you're not even going to use it. So they feel that they lack purpose in that company. And so they fail to appreciate how experimental a startup is. And so these are all things that engineers working in an early stage startup have to embrace and learn sometime in a, yeah, like we call it rude awakening, and really busting the myths of what they think a startup is. Yeah, so these are like 3 classic examples.
So if the mentor cannot provide them for the engineering discipline, so how about the institute, the university? So do they support like the mentor role while they are in the when they are in the training period?
So the question is, can the university provide the engineering supervision that the student
Yes.
needs?
Yes.
So that is a possibility. And students have in the past, if they needed a technical expertise, they either reach out to their own network or they go back to a professor who taught them that course and they consult with that. Or they go online and they find a community and they seek. So part of it is them, and you know what, we use the word resiliency a lot, but we don't always define what we mean by in resiliency. And one of the more useful definition I have for resiliency that I borrowed from colleagues from a university in Toronto, the Toronto Metropolitan University, is having both the agency, sorry, having the knowledge about the resources that you have access to and the agency to act on that when in a state of need. So when you are faced with a need and you are faced with a challenge, knowing that resources exist is part of that. The other part of resiliency is that you feel empowered to reach out and use them and access them and overcome that challenge. And so this is a way for students to build resiliency. If they can't find help within, they have to reach out. And so these are all discussions we have in the classroom. So these are part of the discussions that preparing students to what they will face in a startup environment is all part of what you just asked. But we don't structure it. We don't front load it. We let them figure it out because that's the only way that they can build that resiliency and entrepreneurial mindset that they need to be successful in such an environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the student? Manirat,
Yes.
do you want to ask question?
Please. For me, how many percent of the student who pass the entrepreneur and work graduate work in the sorry for pass the program to be entrepreneur in the real business?
How many people that have
How many percent will
participated
you?
in the program ended up as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and then when they pass this program, how many percent of them like have the old business like the entrepreneur?
Hmm. Um, um, Maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but I actually don't keep track of all these students individually to see where they end up. Um, Anecdotally, not a lot. Um, most of them take this course because they're curious. They think it's going to be a good experience. Actually, I forgot to ask, are you asking about all the courses I teach or the supervised EWEL specifically? Like, were you thinking of one course in particular or all of them?
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think mix together.
Yeah. So, well, let me kind of break it down. So the startup practicum, um, the the number of students who become entrepreneurs is very small, um, but not insignificant. So anecdotally, maybe I don't know, 1 in 4. Um, and it's really hard to justify to say that they become entrepreneurs because of the course. I would say they had entrepreneurial intention before taking the course. And for them, the course is a leveraging mechanism to get in a startup and build network with other startup and entrepreneurs and get into that ecosystem. So it's an enabler. Um, Most of the students that have taken the engineering's practicum, um, they're hoping to get, if they have entrepreneurial intentions, they didn't say that to me and they didn't act it on since they graduated, as far as I know, because for them it's an employment. It's a way to get supervisor, to give them a reference letter to get a job after. And the priority for them is getting a job because they need to pay tuition and student loans and whatnot. And if they become an entrepreneur, it might happen, but it'll probably be a few years down the line. Um, Most of them definitely are looking this as they see this as a work experience, and working in a startup is just a nice option, but not really the point of it. And it's an opportunity to learn a bit about entrepreneurship if they're curious about it. The technology entrepreneurship course, I've only taught it twice. And that's another interesting mix, because I would say there are a few entrepreneurs that came out of the course, but it's a very small number. Most of them, like probably 90%, go and find employment after graduation. It only makes sense because it's a course and they are graduating from undergrad. They have the debt, tuition, loan they need to repay. And entrepreneurship is challenging in it and itself. A colleague of mine from U of T years ago said something insightful, saying, true entrepreneurs do not take courses in entrepreneurship. They just go out and build a startup. So one would be surprised to see an entrepreneur in a classroom, although some of them take the course again because they appreciate the course content. They like to learn. It's part of their lifelong learning, but they make up a small percentage. I would probably say less than 10%. Oh, you're in a car.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm in the car.
timeshare. Yeah, and then the last group is the capstone, and the capstone course, entrepreneurial capstone, this year was an experiment for the very first time, and out of 48 capstone projects, only 8 of them were identified as entrepreneurial, and of these 8. I would have to say only one is like a more authentic entrepreneurial in nature, because it was brought by somebody who had professional work experience as an engineer and brought this genuine need to say, I want to do this because I would use this in my work after I graduate. There were a few others that were driven by a more, let's say, aspirational entrepreneurial ambition. And probably there's 1 or 2 of them that said, this would be a cool project, and if I get to start a company a few years down the line, that would be amazing. But they didn't really have any specific immediate intention. And the rests, again, were more about the opportunity than the intention to start a company upon graduation. So overall, entrepreneurship is definitely not for everybody. And that being said, there were a few papers that were trying to capture the success rate of whether entrepreneurship education leads to better results. And there were a few papers that suggest that those students who go through entrepreneurship education are statistically more likely to be successful, which again, kind of going back to the survival rate of early stage startup, they're more likely to be successful. But whether they are more likely to start a company, then we go into a lot of selection bias, because students opt into these programs, and therefore it's hard to dismantle their prior intention to doing this anyway. So they would have done it anyway, but the education is definitely showing that their survival rate is better than not having gone through this program, for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions or reflection from the student? I think that's all. As we conclude today's lecture, I like to extend our appreciation to Dr. Eisenstein for his enlightening presentation on entrepreneurship pedagogy within cooperative and work integrated education. In my opinion, his exploration of the modalities of entrepreneurship, like self-directed and supervised, offers valuable insights into nurturing entrepreneurial skills in educational settings. More specifically, the focus on the entrepreneurial capstone engineering design project was particularly compelling, demonstrating how structured yet flexible learning environments can foster innovative thinking and real-world problem-solving skills among students. And now I'd like everyone to join me in a round of applause to show our appreciation for Dr. Eisenstein impactful session.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for the invitation, Atit. I will make sure to stop by your office when I get to Thailand. Hoping before the end of the decade. I don't know. It's 2024, so you never know.
Please. Okay, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. ขอบคุณครับ